People always imagine locked doors when they hear stories like mine. Heavy bolts, screaming, someone trapped against their will. But that was never my reality. There was a door, yes, but it was rarely closed. I could see the sky through the window every day. I could move freely inside these walls. That's why it took me so long to understand that freedom can disappear without anything physically stopping you.
I wasn't forced to stay. I was taught to stay. That difference matters more than people think. From as early as I can remember, the outside world was described to me in careful pieces. Not lies exactly, just selected truths arranged to create fear. Danger was always emphasized. Trust was always discouraged. Curiosity was framed as a weakness, not a gift. She used to say the world takes advantage of people like me. Too kind, too soft, too easily broken. When you hear something like that once, you question it. When you hear it every day, it becomes part of how you see yourself. I didn't think I was imprisoned. I thought I was being protected. And protection feels comforting when you don't know any other way to live. This room didn't start as a cage. It started as a shelter. Familiar walls, predictable routines, silence that felt safe instead of empty. Over time, the same things that soothed me also shrank my world. I stopped imagining places beyond the window. Not because I couldn't see them, but because imagining them felt dangerous, like stepping too close to a cliff edge. Fear doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it's gentle. Sometimes it's wrapped in concern. I worry about you. You wouldn't survive out there. People don't have good intentions. These sentences were never shouted. They were whispered with care. Repeated often enough, they built invisible boundaries stronger than stone. What scares me now is how reasonable it all felt. I wasn't deprived of food or comfort. I had books. I had quiet. I had purpose. I was needed. And when someone needs you, it creates loyalty. It creates obligation. You don't question the hand that depends on you. You convince yourself that staying is a choice, because admitting otherwise would mean admitting loss. There's a strange comfort in being told who you are. It removes responsibility. If you are fragile, then avoiding the world makes sense. If you are unsafe alone, then dependence becomes logical. I didn't have to decide anything. Decisions were already made in my best interest, or so I believed. Over time, I stopped asking questions because the answers were always the same. I learned early that doubt caused tension. Silence caused peace. So I chose silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because harmony felt like survival. When approval is your currency, you spend it carefully. You shape yourself to fit the expectations placed on you. You become smaller without noticing the shrinkage happening. Sometimes I think about how control works best when it feels voluntary. When you thank the person holding you back. When you feel guilty for wanting more. I wasn't scared of punishment. I was scared of disappointing the only voice that mattered in my world. And that kind of fear doesn't leave bruises. It leaves habits. Days blurred together here. Morning light, quiet tasks, evenings filled with warnings disguised as advice. Time passed, but I didn't feel older. Growth requires friction, and nothing here challenged me enough to change. I existed in a loop that felt safe, but strangely empty, like breathing shallow air and calling it enough. Looking back, I see how cleverly the fear was layered. Not all at once. Slowly, carefully. Enough truth to sound believable. Enough affection to feel earned. Enough isolation to make her voice the loudest one in my head. When someone controls the narrative long enough, you stop imagining alternative endings. I never planned to leave. That's important to say. Escape stories always begin with rebellion, but mine began with acceptance. I believed this was my place. I believed the limits were for my own good, and believing that made everything easier. Easier than questioning. Easier than risking the unknown. Still, something inside me resisted quietly. Not loudly enough to act, but enough to feel restless. A small, persistent discomfort I couldn't explain. I ignored it most days. Told myself discomfort was ungrateful, that wanting more meant not appreciating what I had. Gratitude can be a powerful silencer when used the wrong way. If you asked me back then whether I was trapped, I would have said no. I would have defended this place. I would have defended her. That's the part people don't understand. Control works best when the person inside believes they chose it. When the prison feels like home. I'm not telling this story to assign blame. I'm telling it because clarity matters. Because understanding how I stayed is more important than explaining why I left. This didn't start with cruelty. It started with fear. Hers, then mine, intertwined until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This is not the story of a locked tower. This is the story of a mind slowly taught to stay still. And before anything changes, before questions, before escape, before truth, this is where it begins. With a life that looks safe from the inside, and a freedom I didn't yet know how to want. Clarity didn't arrive like a revelation. There was no sudden anger, no dramatic realization. It came quietly, the way truth often does when it's been waiting patiently. I began noticing patterns instead of incidents, repetition instead of intention. It wasn't about what was said once, but what was said every day until it became my inner voice. I started recognizing how my fear had been rehearsed, how certain phrases appeared whenever I leaned too close to curiosity, how concern arrived precisely when I imagined something different. It wasn't coincidence. It was conditioning, and realizing that didn't make me feel betrayed. It made me feel strangely calm, like finally naming a feeling that had lived unnamed for years. For the first time, I stopped asking whether she meant well. That question had kept me stuck for so long. Intention had always been my shield, but impact matters more than intention when you're the one shrinking. And understanding that didn't require hatred. It required honesty. I could acknowledge care without denying harm. I saw myself clearly then. Not weak, not naive, just shaped. Formed by repetition and isolation, the way anything living adapts to its environment. I stopped blaming myself for not knowing what I'd never been allowed to learn. You can't crave a world you've been taught to fear. What surprised me most was the grief. Not for what happened, but for what didn't. The conversations never had, the choices never practiced, the parts of myself that stayed dormant because survival didn't require them. Grief doesn't always come from loss. It comes from realizing how much potential stayed unused. I realized how much of my identity had been built around being needed, being useful, being essential to someone else's comfort. When your worth is measured by how well you serve, independence feels like abandonment. That realization hurt more than the isolation ever did. There was a strange tenderness in seeing myself this way. I didn't feel anger toward the girl who stayed. I felt compassion. She did what she had to do with the information she had. Staying wasn't failure. It was adaptation. And survival deserves respect, even when it costs you growth. The room didn't change. The walls didn't move. But something shifted internally. The silence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling unfinished. I noticed how often I interrupted my own thoughts before they fully formed, how I softened my wants before admitting them to myself. Awareness sharpened everything. I stopped defending the system that shaped me, not aloud, not dramatically, just internally. The reflex to justify softened. I no longer needed to explain why this life was enough. I began admitting, quietly, that maybe it wasn't. And admitting that didn't make me ungrateful. It made me honest. Fear didn't disappear. It became clearer, more defined, less mythical. I could see where it came from and how it had been fed. Fear loses power when you understand its origin. It stops being a prophecy and becomes a memory. I didn't rush to change anything. That's important. Awareness doesn't demand immediate action. Sometimes it only asks you to stop lying to yourself. I let the truth sit beside me without forcing it to become a decision. Growth doesn't always need movement. Sometimes it just needs space. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a self not designed around protection. Not fragile, not dependent, just untested. And untested doesn't mean incapable. It means unfinished. That distinction changed everything. I noticed how often my body knew things before my mind allowed them. Tension when warnings came, relief when silence broke, curiosity returning in small, harmless ways. Awareness isn't just intellectual, it's physical. My body had been waiting for permission to exhale. This wasn't the moment I left. This was the moment I stopped pretending I didn't want to. Desire doesn't demand action immediately. Sometimes it just wants to be acknowledged without shame. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for what I was beginning to see. Clarity is private before it's public, and I protected it carefully, the way you protect something fragile but growing. Not everything needs to be shared to be real. This episode doesn't end with freedom. It ends with truth. With understanding how I stayed and why it made sense at the time. Before escape, before confrontation, before the outside world, there is this moment. The moment you stop calling survival a choice and start calling awareness the beginning.